Start here. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Contemporary Issues Sunday School class. We are pleased today on Mother's Day to have all mothers here. Welcome. And here I go.
Here
That's
you
right.
go.
We appreciate mothers. They're special. That's right. And we are pleased to have Mr. Ron today. We're going to talk about inequality around the world, and how economic inequality affects us in ways we don't really think about. So, very good. Our usual announcements, Zoomers, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen. And we are especially glad to have Susan with us today from Uzbekistan. She's traveling for pleasure. She's in a kind of a bed and breakfast, she said, in Uzbekistan with a pretty design behind her. Amazing that we can join from around the world. And we are recording this for future playback. And any other announcements? Do we have anything? Lots of things going on at church, of course. But we want to give plenty of time to Ron today. Jim.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Bruce and Adrian Glenn, who are brand new to the church.
Good. Nice to have you with us. Hope you'll come back. If you'd like to give us your email address, I'll put you on our list to see what our topics are each week. And you can drop in whenever you'd like to. So come up after class and do that. All right. Any other announcements?
We need to adjust the screen here.
Yes, do that.
Steve's mention of itching ears reminds me, it was said of either President Coolidge or Harding that they, when they spoke, there were great clouds of words that occasionally grasped hold of an idea.
It must have been Harding because Coolidge was quiet Cal.
Okay,
That's
all right. Also, I want to mention, we've got a few books and even some DVDs that are available over on that shelf behind the house over there. But one of them in particular that somewhat relates to today's topic is Sidney Poitier's classic Separate but Equal. It's about 3 hours, but I found the movie extremely gripping and educational and thought-provoking. So I'll pass that over to put back in the shelf area there. The book, of course, we're basing today's lesson on is largely this one right here by Payne, Keith Payne. We did a book on Keith Payne just a few weeks ago, and we talked about his expressing the term your psychological immune system. But this book was particularly enjoyed and commended by President Obama. And I'll pass this around, but it's in plain language, it talks about inequality and what it does. One of the things we'll mention relative to inequality is that most people, when we think inequality, we think economic inequality, and that's certainly a pervasive one, but it's not the only thing. And the economic inequality and other kinds and facets of inequality have harmful effects on people more than we would ever imagine. So there's a picture of Keith Payne. He's a PhD at that's not the University of Northern Colorado, that's the University of North Carolina. So he's in the Chapel Hill, North Carolina area. Next slide. Here's a cartoon coming up that I love. If we can read the caption. The guy is looking out over his skyscraper, Manhattan. Thank heaven I'm only morally bankrupt.
Yeah, sounds like someone else.
And next one. We, of course, have seen an ascension to the popery of a new pope. But here was a quote from the just deceased departing pope. And he said, as long as the problems of the poor are not radically resolved by rejecting the absolute autonomy of markets and financial speculation, by attacking the structural causes of inequality, no solutions will be found. So Francis was certainly very cognizant of the poor and the need for societies and economies to work hard on trying to lift the poor and break down some of the inequality. And I like that cartoon. Now the DEI woke is gone, I'm gonna get me one of them high-paying tech jobs. Okay, next one. Okay, again, The Broken Ladder is the book we're reviewing today. I want to also recommend the book Behave by Sapolsky. And this is not known by as many people as I think it should be known, but it talks about the human psyche and how we're formed and how our biology and our mind and our spirituality all interact to make us what we are. Next one. I'm going to reach back in this one to my beginnings. Here's the house I grew up in. It was about 770 square feet in Cincinnati, Ohio, and there were 6 of us living in there. We were hands down the poorest house on the street for whatever reason. My bedroom window was right there to the right, and it was no more than 8 feet from the sidewalk and maybe 12 feet from the street. So I could hear every car go by, and if I was talking, I could hear conversations of people walking down the street. But there was only one room in our house big enough for 5 people to maybe gather, 5 or 6. You could in the basement perhaps, but the kitchen table, which means we couldn't really have company over. If there wasn't a room for people to gather, I mean, you can't have gatherings. The other thing I remember, fortunately, I went to a really good elementary school, Coverdale Elementary, but I was kind of a little bit on the lower end economically relative to my peers. I think I could count in elementary school, I had a sack lunch every day. I mean, every day. And whereas a high percentage of the kids got to get their 30-cent lunch tokens and go through the lunch line. But I think that only happened to me twice. And then to make things worse, they had the kids with the sack lunch sit in the far separate section of the cafeteria. You weren't supposed to intermingle and get in the way of the people with their, and I guess I hadn't thought of it that way, but in a way it was kind of a little bit of a subtle inequality pressure. And I remember my mom used to just clothe us with a lot of hand-me-downs and a cheap discount store called Chinatown, and buy secondhand, lowest, cheapest clothing you could. I remember at one of my reunions, a gal said to me, "Yeah, I remember you walking down the hall in the 3rd grade, and you had these old corduroy pants that made a sawboard sound." But on the plus side, I felt pretty good about how I was treated at my school. But there's that inequality. Anybody here had the experience of being on maybe the backside of the curve economically in your school?
Ron, I've shared with you that you remind me of my high school boyfriend a lot. Voice, looks, everything, and his background is just like yours.
Wow.
And he's a chaplain
Oh, wow.
at a
Okay.
Baptist church in Tennessee. I couldn't resist but to tell you all that because it's so parallel.
Okay.
He just had an earthquake yesterday.
Yeah.
Tennessee had an earthquake
Tennessee,
yesterday.
I'll have to call Jim.
Yeah. I could talk a lot more about the effects.
I bet.
Fortunately, though, it at least had a couple positive things. Number one, it gave me a sensitivity for those who didn't have as much, a real sensitivity for it, and also a burning desire to get out of that and realizing that I better not sit on my duff and throw away my books. If I wanted to get out of this lesser economic situation, I better work my tail off and do everything I can. So at least it had that positive effect. There's a song I love by Johnny Rivers, "The Poor Side of Town." Everybody ever heard that? You know, we weren't dirt poor by no means, but it was
I
tight.
had a roof over your head.
So I love that song by Johnny Rivers. Next slide. Okay, the billionaire class. This is a count by Forbes magazine of the number of billionaires in the world. And we go back to 1987, not that long ago, there were only 140. And we can see as we march up in the years, 2007, 17, the number of billionaires has gone up quite substantially.
As the
And
value of the dollar has gone down.
yeah, but still, they're worth over 16 trillion, the billionaires. Up nearly 2 trillion in just 1 year. So there is definitely a upper echelon of people in the world, really. They're moving into this billionaire class, and it is putting inequality into effect.
Almost an exponential curve.
Yeah. Next one. Okay. We've got quite a few handouts this morning, but if you want to look at it, here's one curve that plots. This is not billionaires or millionaires, but the top 1% of those in the United States. And we can see where the billionaire curve is the blue line, the bottom one, and it's grown from under 20%, like maybe 17%, up to 27, 28%, something like that. So we can, and whereas the middle class, wealth percentage keeps coming down. And they've actually found this is sort of a fact of economics. The capitalist system, as it thrives, it produces more millionaires and billionaires, but it also doesn't raise all boats equally, for sure. Okay, next slide. How's the wealth divided in the United States? This is an important one to understand. The second bar there, it says the top 20% excluding the top 1%. So this is taking the top 20%, but peeling off that top 1%. So we push that top 1% up there, and we can see by the size of the bar that they have something like, you know, close to a third of all the wealth in the hands of the top 1%. The top 20% have a tremendous amount. But as we see as we work our way down, these are quintiles where you slice the income brackets into 20% wide sectors. And we can see the lower 60% of American families constitute, in terms of what they own in wealth, just roughly 21% of the wealth. And they call the middle class that middle quintile, and they only have about 11% of America's wealth. So we can see that society is economically unequal in terms of resources. Next slide. If you want to study the Lorenz curve, you can do it. It shows the same basic data in a different graphical format. Next slide. Okay. Payne starts out in his book with some data from the airline industry. The airlines, of course, have had more problems in the last decade of in-flight nasty passengers causing disruptions and all this stuff. As they looked at the data, they found that if the airplane had a really nice first class, the probability of a disturbance on that plane was about 4 times higher. And they attribute it to the passengers getting on the plane, walking through the upper crust first class, seeing the people sipping on cocktails and spread out without their knees stuck in their nose, you know, the tight seats. And it kind of gets them a little bit upset. They said, you know, I got to squash my luggage in that insufficient overhead and sit next to, you know, to two linebackers that squeezed me to death. And they found that, again, psychologically, it was producing, and still does, at least 4 times as many angry economy passengers. So here's how inequality starts to pervade into our lives.
Alcohol too.
Yeah. Next one.
Regular class people.
Okay. Of course, poverty and wealth are relative to what other people have. We compare ourselves to others. For example, who has been through Monticello?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a really cool place.
Yep.
But still, Jefferson didn't have a lot of the things that we have, you know, no electrical devices for the most part. Indoor plumbing as we know it, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, but still, he was incredibly wealthy compared to the people of his time. But compared to today, there's a lot of people in today's society where maybe not the house square footage might not be as large, but he certainly didn't exceed a lot of what we have in some of our Canadian households today. So the author says expectations and context shape our perceptions. Higher status folks, and this data comes from a kid who worked at the child care center in a big university, a very prestigious university. And he asked mom and dad, how come when the really high class people, you know, the super high professors and the high paid researchers come in to pick up their kids, they don't tend to spend as much time talking to you. Whereas the poor folks, the associate professors that are just trying to make it or whatever, or graduate students are poor, and they tend to converse more and pay more attention to you. And they said they've actually found this out. Less wealthy and less powerful folks often try harder to be liked and accepted. And this isn't to say if you're loaded with bucks, you're unfriendly, but it just says if the poorer we are, maybe the harder we have to try to make a good impression. We can't just razzle dazzle them with our wealth and the $100 bills stuffed in our pocket. So interesting observation. Also, we can end up feeling superior or inferior without awareness of how much we're comparing ourselves to others. As we go through life, we kind of stop comparing ourselves so much most of the time to others. We accept where we are, and if we're, I think, good Christians, we don't overdwell on. We at least are appreciative of what we do have, but still, none of us is insensitive to seeing flashes of fabulous wealth and people that have way more than we'll ever hope to have. Next slide. So we compare ourselves to others. Status has been found to be a powerful motivator. Folks often craving to be higher than others on the status ladder. And Payne in his book shows a status ladder with rungs that go higher and higher. And most of us think of ourselves at least somewhere on this ladder. And of course, you can plot your wealth on the ladder or other attributes. But
I've got one for that.
go ahead.
When I started teaching at a private school in Virginia, we went around the science department in this school, Randolph-Macon Academy, and this one gal introduced herself. My name's Sherry Henderson, let's call her, I forget her name. She says, and I've been in this valley for 7 generations.
Wow.
How old are you?
Well, the higher you go, Ron, the harder to fall when you fall.
Very true.
Yeah, that's right.
There was a funny little ditty song that came out. An actor, Irving Kane, played the slob in a beat-up Corvair, while country singer Ed Bruce sang the song, There ain't no lower class than Tennessee trash. That was the song that made fun of rural white trash. Yeah, excellent. Okay. Looking at societies with more income inequality, and we obviously have quite a bit of it in our country, have less social capital. When we say social capital, we mean trust, reciprocity, and cooperation. And they found that the more income inequality you get, the less social capital you tend to have. Stress increases as social capital decreases. Makes sense, because people don't accept each other as well. Where there's a lot of hoarding, social isolation. People feel left out, feel like they're not part of it. They're not, as that 60s song was, I'm in with the in crowd. And every teenager can feel that pressure, trying to be in with the in crowd, and often feeling like they're not. But as inequality rises, the socioeconomic health measure gets worse. So here's another effect. They're finding that as you're poor, and particularly as you feel a lower social status, your health actually goes down. Now, part of it's attributable to you can't afford to go to the doctor or the dentist when you need it, but there's also more to it. You feel low, you feel like, you know, you're not really part of society as much. And it has a definite impact, certainly on your mental health and on you're more likely to go into depression. And it also, in turn, affects your physical health. And states with more income inequality spend less on the key crime fighting tool, education. Inequality fuels violence, mostly the poor on the poor, interestingly enough. Poor folks often don't lash out at the very wealthy. They can't get to them, but they lash out at their own community, the other poor. Maybe they look for somebody worse off than them or somebody to take it out on. And so the poor often take it out on their own. There is in your handouts, a chart showing the states of the United States. Ranked on the x-axis is income inequality, and on the y-axis is life expectancy. And you can look and see where you have more income inequality, you have lower life expectancy. And it's interesting where Colorado falls. We're not as bad off as a lot of the states. We've got maybe less than average, a little bit less than average income inequality. And we rank pretty darn high on life expectancy. Okay.
Moved to Hawaii.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, they're right on the top life expectancy.
Yeah.
That might be part of the diet and the.
Because Colorado is one of the slimmest states in the nation.
It's true. We're one or two in terms of best. I should know from Linda. I see her at Silver Sneakers in the Tuesday class all the time. But yeah. Okay. Next slide. So relative comparisons dominate our perceptions. If you go into it, they found if you go into a state, and Iowa ranks pretty well, it doesn't have horrible income inequality compared to a lot of places. And they find the mood is just a little bit better. People aren't having their noses rubbed into the pavement because they don't own a Rolls Royce. They kind of feel like, yeah, we're all kind of growing corn together and enjoying our farm life and field of dreams. And yeah.
Less than 5% are farmers.
Good point. Good point. Okay. They've also found, we definitely compare ourselves to others. And they found that looking at people in the top quintile, that's the top 20% of earners, often feel less satisfied than those at the bottom. They say the reason for this is a lot of people that are in the top quintile have pretty good paying jobs, but they're rubbing noses every day that the people have really big paying jobs. They see the guy in the front office come down the hall and they don't feel as good. Whereas a lot of people in the lower ranks out in the cubicles or on the factory floor feel like, I'm doing about the same as the rest of the folks here. And they don't feel downgraded because they're rubbing noses with the upper echelon. Okay, next slide. So again, income inequality correlates with more problems. This is a graph showing income inequality by nation this time, and health and social problems. Now, Japan on the x-axis has very low amounts of income inequality compared to a lot of other nations. Surprising. But if we look at our index of health and social problems, the more income inequality you have in a country, the more the health and social problems keep going higher and higher. So that's interesting that Canada has less income inequality than us, and they have substantially less health, social problems, violence, etc. Interesting that Sweden and Japan do really well on low social
Well,
problems.
Finland too, the rich people in Finland hide what they'll drive an old car or live in a smaller house. They don't flaunt it.
Okay, interesting.
Why is that those countries are like that when they are also democracies and capitalist countries?
Part of it is socialized medicine.
Socialized medicine, okay?
Isn't that what?
They also have they have high taxes, but they have extremely strong social nets compared to most countries. They take care of college tuition in Norway and Finland, I believe. If you want to go to college, you can go to college.
Farmers are subsidized, women having children are subsidized, college students are subsidized. Yeah.
Now,
Which country are you talking about?
Norway, Sweden, Finland.
Yeah,
Denmark.
yeah,
Japan
I think
also? Japan also?
I don't know.
I'd have to look them up. But I think the tax rate can get as high as 40%, but the safety nets are there. You don't have to worry about being the poor guy on the street corner without a dime and without health care.
I used to work for a company that was owned by the Swedes. And in order for us Americans to be able to interface with the Swedes, we had a whole cultural class on the Vikings, basically. But what they told us was there at the very, very beginning, back when they were Vikings, that you might have gone and raided Europe, but everything was shared when you came home. So there wasn't, I raided and I got $100,000 and I'm not sharing it. It has to be shared with the grandmothers and the children, and everything was equally shared once I got home. And that culture is still in those Scandinavian countries.
Well, those nice Vikings, that's nice of them.
They had a word for it, but I can't remember. It was a Swedish word.
All right, next slide. All right. The author talks about walking through two towns that both rank reasonably high on prosperity. One was Durham, North Carolina, and the other Columbus, Ohio. And they both have rich, they both have poor. But he said you can really tell as you walk through just down a long street in Durham, North Carolina. He said you go from very wealthy homes, very prosperous areas, and you just go a few blocks and find, shanties and sheds and very poor. So he said it's a culture shock to take a 2-mile walk down some sectors of Durham, North Carolina, where you see tremendous swings in just a few blocks, going from wealthy to middle class to poor, back to wealthy to it's not segregated that well in terms of as you walk through town. He said comparatively though, Columbus, Ohio is the opposite. They have about the same in terms of rich, poor, but the poor are more segregated in one section of town. And you find you'll walk, 40 blocks and just see middle-class homes for a long stretch. So our country has a lot of variation from state to state and city to city in terms of the concentration of the poverty. Sometimes it's spread out a little better, other times it's more concentrated. Next one. Okay, this is one of your handouts. This shows net worth. Now, when you look at economics, you have to look at a family's total worth and then their income. They usually correlate pretty well, but sometimes if you've got enough money, well, the money itself generates an income. You don't have to work if you have got $1 trillion, at least, like most of us. You can just live on your income and consult your investment guys. All right, but we do see here the radical difference in net worth by race. And we can really see how white America has a lot more money in its estates than Black and Hispanic families. And this is one of the things that hurts Black and Hispanics that are trying to get started in business. And certainly, you've all probably noticed it if you go to a concert, an entertainment venue, like a football game, an expensive concert at Red Rocks, you won't find many Blacks or Hispanics there. And it's not because of racial segregation, it's because
$300 ticket.
that ain't where the money is. Yeah, that's not where the money is. So, right. You've seen this slide, we've talked about it. Next one. Okay, here comes up this classic argument that's been going on for hundreds of years. Are people in poverty and poor, is it a character flaw that they have? Or is it the environment? Or some of each sometimes.
Nature versus nurture.
Nature, yeah. There's the character flaw argument, which says if you're poor and you're on the Poe side of town, wrong side of the tracks, it's because it's the college graduates who are smart and the drug addicts are weak-willed. Some folks are simply lazy, irresponsible, or unintelligent, or the poor have a different culture that does not foster middle-class values. So there's the character flaw argument. We flip over to the other side, and others will say poverty itself causes most or many of these flaws. The poor do worse in school because their parents have less time to teach them or lack education themselves. And the households lack books and internet and things they need to learn and grow. The poor are less likely to marry and have strong, stable families. That is true. They're finding now that among the non-college graduates, and particularly in the more rural areas, the majority of couples are pairing off and they're not getting married. They're even having families, but they a very high percentage of them do not get married and form a formal legal family structure. And then, of course, there's the argument that poor have more health issues because of poor diet, lack of access to medical care, and things like that. So we could do a whole course lecture and discuss the pros and cons. And of course, both of those arguments have some truth. Can't say one, it's all one or all the other. So next. Okay. Planning your day, they find that the middle-class families are more likely to have planned itineraries for their day. Things like basketball practice, go out for pizza, shop for an e-bike, etc., like that. Whereas the poor families tend to live for the moment, often lacking transportation and funds to get out. Payne points this out again very sharply in his book. Next one. Okay. Penny points out there's the Live Fast, Die Young. What was it? The rock group, the Grassroots. Live for Today. I think it was one of their hit songs. But they have found that cultures, when subjected to danger and stress, reproduce early and often. It's a behavior that seems to respond to the stress. Whereas in good times, cultures have more time to plan for families, better habitat, better farms, irrigation canal, and the childbirth rate goes down as things get less stressful. Interesting. And people don't have children at as early an age if they're not in such stressful environments. They did a study in Chicago, and they found that the more and more you moved into a poverty region, the worse it got. The number of very early teenage pregnancies went up and up and up. And yeah, gals having children at age 14, things like this. Okay.
I did some research on that,
Oh,
and the conclusion was that they had no vision of a future. And so why not have a baby?
Hmm.
They had no vision.
That was their baby. The baby gives them pleasure.
we probably need to get Linda to give us a class because she's got some really rich experience background working with poor and poverty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll have to ask you to do that, Linda. Yeah.
I'll just butt in.
Again, a 1991 psychology study found women raised in harsh, stressful, chaotic environments are more likely to have kids earlier. Again, the Chicago neighborhood study. When people are made to feel poor, they take whatever they can immediately and ignore the future. And living less well or less than others was sufficient to trigger this live fast, die young behavior. Don't put off instant pleasure. Do it now. Don't sacrifice
Well, there's
instant.
no need to save money either,
Good point.
because you don't have any vision of a better future.
No delayed gratification.
Get in while you can.
Okay. The- My favorite proponent of the no respect issue is good old Rodney Dangerfield. We've all talk about no respect. And Payne in his book talks about that again, the status ladder. When he said where people place themselves on the status ladder, where you say I'm a 4 or I'm a 7, is a better predictor of health than their actual income or education. So it's not entirely how much education or money you have, but it's where you think you or feel like you are on the status ladder. So to quote a Rodney Dangerfield movie, I am great, I am wonderful, everybody loves me. He was in Ladybugs, which was filmed here in Denver. And so having a good image of yourself will definitely help you put yourself on a perceived higher ladder strung, and you'll feel better, even if somebody else might not think you are. So your self-worth, respect indicator is important to you. Again, the author keeps the theme of the book. He says again and again, it's the inequality in incomes, not the income itself. It tends to be a higher driver. And again, there's the data by states, and you've got that one in your handout. All right,
Ron,
go ahead.
don't you think that media and the marketers really stimulate that inequality. They give the image of where you should be. It's the marketing genius in selling products and so on. And
Oh, yeah.
there are images out there that provoke that in our culture and overseas, the views of America being what is portrayed in the movies and the media.
Right. It could be everything from, do you have the latest Levi jeans or whatever's in vogue in terms of what to wear
They
or
call it
what?
snob appeal. Snob appeal.
Okay, we're almost done here. We want to get some good discussion going. We do know right now the middle-aged white guys are suffering. There's the lifespan of particularly white, middle-aged males is dropping and not going back up now that we've come out of COVID. Life expectancy for men is now 73 years, whereas women have a 79-year. As that one comedian was on the internet, he said, yeah, when I saw this data, I'm thinking it over hard and considering a sex change operation. It's already 72. But definitely the opioid epidemic, mental health, and chronic metabolic disease are key factors. But there is a problem, and we are seeing the death rates, particularly in a lot of the Midwestern states, go really bad. Next chart. This shows drug death rates, and it's interesting how, you know, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania are having, particularly the rural areas. You say, oh, it's the poverty in downtown Cincinnati or something. No, it's the bad data is coming in from the rural counties in Ohio. The white guys are killing themselves.
Does that mean Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota are okay?
Let's see, looking at the scale. Yeah, probably does.
Less than 18%.
There's a scale, right?
What did you call the Iowans, Eric? Idiots out walking around?
That's what people in Minnesota call it.
Oh,
Eric was on a hike with us, and he said, you know what they call us in Iowa? I said, oh. Okay. Stress and low status effect. How many saw the movie 9 to 5 with Dolly Parton? We could probably all sing the song, and it's a classic. But again, the author points out that again, the stress triggers inflammation in your joints, promotes autoimmune diseases. So stress and low status was one of the factors. Stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisone get in the bloodstream and put more glucose, fat, and proteins, which interfere with insulin. So stress hurts. You're combating your A1C. Stress signals the kidneys that stop taking water out of the bloodstream. And disease itself often induces fever, loss of appetite, aches, and pains. Definitely, they say for children, extreme prolonged stress redirects energy for growth. That means kids that are in an extreme stress or poverty situation don't even get to grow to the height or the stature that they might have done had not the stress been there.
Ukraine.
Okay. So critical social evaluation can zap you. There's a picture of that famous Disney movie, Cinderella. Particularly for those rating themselves low on the social ladder. What was that other song? Oh, I've got friends in low places.
Yeah.
Remember that country song?
Don't be key.
They said,
No.
they said the social ladder,
The other guy.
hurt can start inflammation going in your body within 90 minutes. In other words, if you get, particularly as a teenage girl, get rejected by your peers, have an incident in the hallway that doesn't hurt you physically, but really puts you under stress, makes you feel like you're
you're a nobody, you've been rejected, you've been pushed down. It starts showing up in your bloodstream and the inflammation starts happening within 90 minutes. So it certainly tells us that we need to combat stress, and we need to work on our image and our feelings of self-worth and happiness. Yeah. And of course, more inequality shortens our life. That's national data. And more inequality means you don't live as long as you might otherwise. Okay, I've yacked a lot. Let's get some good, some more comments from everybody here. Experiences, thoughts? We'll start with Eric and then jump back here to.
In graduate school, we had to read a book called Savage Inequalities.
Here,
Louder.
Yeah.
Book called Savage Inequalities that I read in graduate school when I was getting my master's in education. It talked about the differences with schools in St. Louis versus East St. Louis. Elementary schools in East St. Louis had sewage backing up in the basement. And a lot of the inequality in schools was attributed to our current funding formula, which is property tax. They're not getting money from the Department of Education. They're getting money from the local property taxes. And there isn't enough money in East St. Louis to take care of their schools. It's like the difference between North Side Chicago versus South Side Chicago. And it's because of this funding formula. That's not true in Scandinavia, where the federal government hands out the money to all the schools, and that makes the funding equal. Here, you've got this disparity in funding because of property taxes. And that's where they get most of their money, schools.
I just want to make a comment about something different. I was talking with a young Ukrainian woman who's probably about 30 yesterday. And she was sharing with me that they went to a party full of her, people from the Ukraine. And they're very judgmental about the inequality in devices and cars. And they want to be able to show their family in Ukraine that they are doing really well in the United States. So they have to have the latest car, the latest phone, and they are judged within their own community on whether they've got the newest phone or the car or the clothes, anything else. So I was kind of taken aback. That's right.
So would they spend their money on things like that?
Yes.
As opposed to the things like food and.
Absolutely. It's about going on Facebook and saying, look how great we're doing. We have a fabulous house. We have a fabulous car. Yeah.
Ron, can you talk about the difference between income, wealth, and status?
Oh, that's
covered that already.
yeah.
We've got a Zoomer that would like to comment. Grant? In
Yes.
Nebraska?
Yes.
Are you in Nebraska today, Grant?
What's that?
You in Nebraska today?
Yes, I am.
Go right ahead.
I have a question about I guess a summary of the book. What does the author promote or ask for some sort of monetary equality of some sort, or does he is this just a statistic book?
He identifies the problem, but he leaves it for further discussion on what society should do to attack it. He makes it a strong case that we shouldn't just ignore it, but he doesn't have a multi-chapters on specific recommendation. He leaves that to the reader and to think about. Although it's obvious from some of the examples what many of the solutions are by just reading what the causes are.
Ron, Joy back here.
Yeah, Joy.
Joy back here. Is that the book does not talk about financial inequality and violence.
Financial inequality and what?
Violence. Crime.
Violence. Okay, it does. Yeah, and I want to say, particularly with a book like this, to condense it into a 30 or 40 minute presentation is very difficult. And in fact, I can say the presentations that we often give can only give skimmings of some of these books that have tremendous depth, and certain this subject matter, again, could be a subject of many weeks of coursework.
Thing that always bothers me, about talking like this is that we talk about the problems, but it's really difficult to talk about solutions. And, the big serve that this church, obviously a Christian church has helping the poor is one of our prime motives, our prime directives. And I think about the big serve that we just did last weekend. And I think about helping all of the people that we helped over that period of time. But one of the things that I've always thought, I think the Big Serve is a wonderful program that we have created. And one of the big things about it is that we are brought face to face with poverty, with the need of poor people, and in a way that in so many of our lives, we are segregated. And the Big Serve gives us an opportunity to go to East Elementary, to talk about food, hunger, and things like that, and to become aware of it on a very real basis, very real way, rather than just statistics or something like that.
Okay. Good point. We need to, sometimes the class will point out problems, but the solutions is even more important maybe, and we don't spend enough time on that. So, yeah.
It's certainly encouraging what some of our very successful capitalists have done, like John D. Rockefeller and Warren Buffett more recently, and Bill Gates, what they're doing with money they've earned and how they're using money. People should not be damned for being successful in America, but who are entirely successful. How they use their money.
Yeah.
Role model.
John D.
Well,
Rockefeller
I
Jr.
like the expression that one of them said. The man who dies rich.
Oh, yeah.
Dies disgraced.
Say it again.
Bill Gates.
Rondi, do you think it's fair to say that Republicans have no problem with wealth inequality? Because America should be a place where you can get rich as you want, and that's your freedom to do. And you shouldn't have it taken away from you. Whereas the Democrats have traditionally said that we're concerned about wealth inequality, let's tax the rich higher. You don't need that much money, and it's helped society if we did have higher taxes on those who are so wealthy.
The two parties do differ rather dramatically. One feels more strongly that redistribution and more redistribution is critical to build a better nation. The other party, it's more of a, shall I say, every man for himself.
Individualism.
Yeah.
Linda, would you repeat this for the folks in the back? I think there's some that didn't hear what you're about inequality. Would you repeat what you just said for the people in the back?
The man who dies rich.
Guys.
Guys, disgrace.
Disgrace.
Yeah, Bill Gates just announced he's going to give away all of his wealth
Yeah.
in the next 20 years.
45.
Oh, believe it when I see it.
Believe it when I see it.
It's already done.
Carol had her hand up.
Reasonable.
That says a man is famous for whom he is, not for what he has.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Bert, if you didn't hear it, Carol has a,
I've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse.
You can't take it with you.
Over here and then back.
I grew up in on a farm, but there was a small town in our community, about 200 people. And mostly blacks lived in in the town. There were a few whites on the southern part, but mostly blacks. And I was shocked to learn as a teenager, my mother had visited some of these black homes. I was shocked to find out that some of their floors were dirt. They swept them with a broom. And in Missouri, that is not desirable in the winter.
Okay, back over here.
I just wanted to also mention, this reminds me of prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
If you are good with God, you're gonna get rich.
Yeah.
Oral Roberts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Christine and then
Rachel.
Well, I know. Because it brings in revenue.
On
Save
these
it.
billionaires,
To get
with
revenue.
their background as to why it is that some billionaires end up having 10 houses and yachts, and other billionaires like Gates and others give. I mean, in their background, how they got the wealth. I don't know if there's any research, why is it that some billionaires hoard it and want more and more and give nothing to the back to society from which they got that wealth, and others tend to, feel free that they want to give it away.
So when I was in college, I can remember vividly this class in economics. And they were talking about capitalism, and of course, America is a capitalistic society. But the key of that was capitalism does not solve all problems. And there's a balance there. I mean, does a park capitalistically help you? No, but does it raise the general well-being of your community? Yes. So that's where America, I really think, is struggling, is the fact that it's not all about capitalism, it's about a balance.
You're rich. Yeah.
The slogan I had on my classroom door was, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give.
That's right.
We've got to wrap up. I want to give our Zoomers a chance to comment. Susan, if you have, or Grant, go ahead.
Yeah, the recent happening to the United Health CEO and the support that so many people have for the shooter is amazing.
Yeah.
You
They're
know,
making
I
a
mean,
movie of that guy.
what's that?
They're making a movie out of that guy.
You know, and I don't know.
Omar.
All I'm just pointing out is that here it, and he grew up affluent, but at the same time, he has the feelings of all of these people who have had health insurance denied and all those kinds of things. And then here's this CEO making 25 million a year. And so this whole thing can fit into this a little bit.
It's all about justice and inequality. Yep. Any final thoughts when we wrap up?
What time is it in Uzbekistan?
Susan, what time is it in Uzbekistan?
It's 10:30 at night.
All right.
It's almost tomorrow.
We're sure glad you could join us.
Not quite 12 hours.
Any final thoughts, anybody, or comments? Ann?
Well, I would just comment on a couple of experiences I personally have had in the last couple of years. One of which was talking to a new PCP doctor at United Healthcare. And just in conversation, I asked him, because he was relatively new, he'd been up in Greeley for many years, so he was not new to being a physician. But I said, just out of curiosity, what percentage do you think of your patients, their issues are when they come to see you? He didn't hesitate a minute. He said anxiety and depression. That's primarily what I'm treating. And the second thing I want to share with you, which I found overwhelming, I live near Arapahoe High School. And I had fallen on walking to the mall one day, and about 4 cars came and
gratefully, helped me. And one was a student. And the first one was a student, right there from Arapahoe High School. And just in conversation again, because he was obviously flustered and didn't know what to say to me and so forth. But I said, I did observe this weekend that there was a lot of activity at Dry Creek and University of students on the weekend. And do you know what that was about? Because school was not in session. He said, yes, we had 2 suicides at Arapahoe High School this week. And worse than that, we're talking about depression, anxiety, issues of that nature. He said that's the 7th suicide at Arapahoe High School this year.
Oh, my
The
God.
year was not over.
Oh,
This is one of the biggest reasons, right?
oh,
Social media.
I
Wow,
couldn't agree with
thanks.
you more, except, the
Thanks for
media
sharing.
is covering that up. You're not gonna see that in the newspaper.
yeah, yeah, we don't know. Cover that. Thank you,
But that's a
Ann.
reality.
We
We're
gotta-
talking about
We got to wrap up, but I want to give George the last comment. Go ahead, George.
When this all started, we heard about you growing up in a small house and relatively low income, I'm guessing. Now, you were trapped in that cycle of poverty or low income. You were able to raise yourself out of that.
Yeah,
Our society allows you to kind of work for.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, and I want to attribute who helped me out of that. It was a good Cincinnati public school system. The schools in my area, big Catholic family across the street that had really good moral values and we were good friends with. And the University of Cincinnati was funded heavily by the state, the city, and federal government, such that tuition was dirt cheap. And then the federal government gave me a job. It was a co-op engineering school. So I went to work part-time as I went through this 5-year college program with the U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So it was federal money. Me as a intern co-op student, they poured the money. It wasn't big money, but it was enough. It saved my hide. It enabled me to pay my tuition, do my living expenses, and get through. I wrote a letter to the editor just yesterday talking about how they've cut all these internships and research grants and stuff. That's going to just absolutely clobber a lot of really good poor and middle class students that need help. Thank you, Uncle Sam, for giving me my internship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Good presentation. Thank you.
Bye.
Glad you could
See
join us.
you.
Good job. Thank you.
Study you mentioned in Chicago.
It's somewhere around here. We could look it up in the book. But I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, I just.
It's mentioned in the.
Around for the end, I don't use that. That was good. That's why I think it was very good.